Now, voting has been taking place in Rwanda, where 9 million eligible voters in the East African country have been choosing their MPs and their next president. Paul Kagame is widely expected to secure a fourth term in office. Only 2 contenders have been cleared to run against him. President Kagame has won previous elections with more than 90%. In fact, in the last election in 2017, he secured 99% of the vote. His critics have questioned how he's been able to do this and have criticized the shrinking of the democratic space in Rwanda. Mr. Kagame has been president of Rwanda for the last 24 years.
Expectation, as I mentioned this last week, that I'm hoping to get at least 55% of the vote for president and at least 10 times more MPs. We had 2 MPs last time, so we're hoping to have at least 20 MPs this time.
Well, for more on this, I'm joined now in the studio by Professor Tunde Esan, Professor of International Relations with a focus on the history of African elections and democratic developments on the continent and beyond. Great to see you again.
It's good to see you,
Thank you
Charles.
very much for coming in. What are you hearing about how the voting has gone so far? Has it been smooth and the turnout high? Because in the past, elections in the country have pulled huge crowds, which they seem to be on the face of it, to point to the popularity of Paul Kagame.
Interestingly, I mean, it's just like it was in the past. The turnout has been fair, and it has been such a way that, you know, a large turnout of voters, as it were. And we're looking at approximately minimum of 60 to 65% of the voters voting in this election, as it was. And it has always been. So the excitement has been there. When you look at the population of Rwanda, you know that you can appreciate that more than 60% of Rwanda population under the age of 30. You know, that was almost 50% actually were born after 1994. So most of them are excited about voting. Many of them are voting for the first time. So they want to go out there and vote, and they are doing that. And they have done that today.
And would it be fair to say that the outcome of this election is a foregone conclusion and that Paul Kagame will emerge victorious?
It will be difficult for any of the opposition to be so sure that he can beat Paul Kagame. The highest we had the last election was the Democratic Green Party, pulling about on the average of 3% of the vote, while Rwanda pulled about 1 to 2% of the votes. So, I mean, it will be a miracle for them. It's enormous for them to come around and within 5 years and upstage, you know, the Rwandan Patriotic Front. That will be very, very tough. So it is almost expected, as it were. But let's not speculate. We're analysts. We are making submissions. But it is likely that Paul Kagame will come back again.
Well, in that regard, I mean, as you mentioned, there are 2 other candidates. Why are they standing if they have absolutely no chance?
I admire their courage. I admire the courage, you know, Frank Ebenezer and Philip Mbaripana. It doesn't matter, you know, you keep fighting. I wish the 8 other candidates that were disqualified have been able to, particularly the young lady there, Diane, you understand? Yeah,
well, yes, I mean, they are critics of the president, and they were all disqualified, well, you know, at least 3 of them.
It's an evolution. When you look at it, democratic process, it goes on, and if none of them stand, then nobody can say, look, why did he win in the first place? So it's quite commendable that they had the courage to do that, particularly when you look at the percentage of the votes they had the last time. It takes a man of God to say, look, I'm throwing in my heart again.
Yeah, but I mean, the impression that critics give is that these people are simply selected, a bit like what we see in Iran, not quite so
they are
bad,
moderates.
but we kind of see them come out there and, you know, make so that it looks like it's a democratic exercise.
Yeah, I understand what you are saying, but yeah. Even if the other ones have come out, when you look at the voting process, the voters turn out, and there have been no protests literally for in the past 3 elections. You understand? So you cannot say actually, I mean, for sure that look, there will have been much difference. Maybe 1 or 2 of them we have made a lot of impact. Because when you look at the background to the whole story, you know, the emergence of Paul Kagame is an historical evolution and development in Rwanda.
Yes, I want to get, sorry to interrupt you, I want to get to that in 1 second. But I just want to deal with the opposition and all the rest of it, because there's a lot of criticism that the democratic space in Rwanda is shrinking. But then, as you pointed out, there's always an enormous turnout in elections. And, you know, it's a bit of a paradox, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. But like I told you, the fear of the past makes people feel that, look, let's play safe and go with Paul. April 16, 1994, the plane, you know, carrying the president, Abrahima, was shot down, and that nation entered one of the most turbulent points in history in the 21st century, where for 100 days there was genocide, literally changing the landscape of that country, the land of 1,000 hills, and thousands of people, if not millions, perished in that.
And by way of background, just to I mean, you'll continue talking in a minute, but I mean, Paul Kagame is credited with restoring the stability of Rwanda after that genocide. But human rights groups, as well as the UN, criticize not just the lack of a free opposition, but also things like involvement in the conflict in the DRC and other issues. Isn't that a fact?
It is, it is. I'm going somewhere. Sure. What I'm saying essentially is that that nation finds itself as a crossroad of history. It's either we go with overambitious Paul, who is not ready to let go, or we might be risking a journey back to the past. That's where I'm going. It is not too palatable. It may not necessarily be as exciting as it were. And coupled with the fact that a large majority of the voters are just coming up, it is history of the past. What they know is the charismatic, you understand, gangling Paul, you understand, occupying the space. But like I said, it is not that it is the correct thing to do. It is not that it is the ideal thing to do. It is not that it is good, it's a good example for Central Africa, particularly a very, very turbulent region. You understand? Remember, they are bordered by Burundi and equally by Congo, Democratic Republic of DRC. And like you rightly say, you have M23, which is suspectedly being sponsored and backed by Rwanda, particularly Paul. And of course, that of course is creating a lot of problem and tension in that region, which has been going through a lot of challenges for years and years. So what I'm saying essentially is that the emergence of Paul and is occupying this space. It's not so much as if it is interesting, palatable, or even acceptable to a large majority of the people, but it is such that, look, our past may be haunting us. And that to play safe and avoid a journey back to the past, let's see how far we can go with Paul.
Yes, that's an interesting point, because if he suddenly keels over and dies, hopefully not, but I mean, if he does, then obviously there has to be, that's always an argument that people make about people who hold onto the reins of power. That if something, I mean, if you're the be-all and end-all, but you're a mere mortal, and something happens to you, what do they do?
What do they do?
Yeah.
So we're looking at a nation with so much prospect. I want to believe that, you know, a lot of people know a lot of things about Rwanda, not necessarily because of the actual developmental indices, which is still very poor. A nation of, I think, 23 to 24 million people. I mean, and the GDP is just about $14 billion. You understand? That's quite small. You know, per capita income less than $1,500. You know, that means literally about 60% of the population lives below the poverty line. But like I said, it's an evolutionary process, an historical, you know, development that we are witnessing in Central Africa. And it's a very turbulent region, you know. And when you look at it, like it is bordered by Burundi, you know, It's a very, very turbulent history, and DRC.
No, absolutely. And but I mean, in the context of all that you've said, I mean, including the issue of you know, the human rights groups, UN as well, criticizing the lack of a free opposition, involvement in the conflict in the DRC and other sort of domestic human rights issues. I mean, Mr. Kagame doesn't seem to be challenged much by the international community. Why is that?
At the last election, Paul Kagame was challenged. A lot of people talked about the human rights abuses, the narrow democratic space, and the banning and unbanning of opposition candidates, and of course, taking the heart away from others and gathering it together to be his own and throwing it into the ring, being the only participant there. But, you know, in 5 years, a lot of development. Ukraine that has distracted the entire world, you understand, and the war in Gaza. So compared with about 5 years ago when everybody was saying, look, what is Paul still doing there after a long time? And not only that, the younger ones are coming up, you know, and the democratic space is narrowed, was very narrow that time, keeps getting narrow, as it were. There was a lot of criticism by the international community, but now because of the fact that there are a lot of things happening outside of Rwanda, particularly, remember Sudan is still there, and people are not even talking about it. That's equally in Central Africa, as it were, and part of North Africa, you know, not too far from where Rwanda is. So it is not an advantage, as it were, but it is a distraction that is favoring Paul Kagame and RPF.
Very interesting. And we're almost out of time. When will we know the results of this election?
They talk about 28th of this month.
28th?
2020. 20. So we're talking about
20th
of this month, you know, or 22.
So that's
as
in
between
just
20
a few
and
days from now.
you know, they're talking about 28th of this month. That's what we'll learn, that the result will be formally released by 28th of this month.
Well, thank you very much indeed for your analysis.
Yeah.
I mean, it's always very illuminating when we get to talk with you. Professor Tunde Esan is Professor of International Relations with a focus on the history of African elections and democratic developments on the continent and beyond. Thank you very much indeed, and good to see you.